Welcome to Everyday Economics, a podcast that helps you learn about the economic world happening around you every day. I'm your host, Chris Krug, president of the 501c3 nonprofit Franklin News Foundation. Everyday Economics is a production of America's Talking Network. You can check out all of our great podcasts at americastalking.com. To support podcasts such as Everyday Economics, please make your tax-deductible charitable contribution by clicking the link in the show description. We're recording this episode on Wednesday, January 4th, and joining me as always is my partner, Dr. Orphe Divounguy, PhD economist. Dr. O, we've started a new year. There's been a lot of tumult in the housing market in the past year. It started out like a house on fire. Literally, by the spring, multiple offers was really the rule rather than an exception. I think I've shared with you before that, that we were looking to move and made an offer on 2 properties. And there were, in each case, more than a dozen offers that came in on the homes that we were looking at. By the end of this year, things had cooled off considerably. And now, as we enter 2023, there's just a tremendous amount of speculation as to which way the market will go. And one of the conversations that's occurring out there is around the idea of a housing bubble leading to a housing crash. There's no one person who's driving that conversation. That seems to be a chorus. What is your take? What are you thinking? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I hear this all the time, and I hear a lot of pundits. You have very successful, I kind of respect this guy, Graham Stevens. He's got this YouTube channel, very successful investor. I mean, I like the guy. I mean, he starts, he likes to tease you into this thing, right? He starts out with, oh my gosh, home prices are falling. But then he ends his whole thing with, look, this is not an apocalyptic scenario. Because basically, you have homeowners locked into very low mortgage rates that are now rushing the market. They're not coming on the market desperate to sell anything. In fact, when you look at new listings, the flow of new units coming on the market, it's gone down over the past year. And so you don't have the kind of event that we had before the global financial crisis, where you had a rush of desperate sellers. Realtors has a great stat that I refer to very often. This year, I think only 1% of realtors were dealing with distressed seller compared to 49% before the the global financial crisis. And so we're just not there. I mean, yes, inventory is rising. And the only reason inventory is rising is because units are taking longer to sell. Buyers have pulled back. Okay. The fact that buyers have pulled back means the units are taking longer to sell. And then the sellers who are currently in the markets wanting to sell are not desperate. They're not cutting prices as fast as they would have if they were desperate. And so you have because we know that price cuts actually reduce the time it takes to sell a home. When I talk to sellers, I tell people all the time, look, it's not because your neighbor sold his house for $50,000 more. You got to cut that price. They're not cutting price. They should. I think they should. I think sellers should be working with agents to make sure they price their homes correctly in order to sell. But, they're not doing that. Another thing about sellers being comfortable is that they're sitting on record high home equity, especially in those markets where you're seeing the inventory increases. I saw, we talk about another pundit very often, a guy named Nick Gurley. And Nick Gurley, right, has this thing out, I think on Twitter maybe, this recent thing, where he's like, look, the sky is falling. At Boise, Idaho, inventory up. He's talking about these Western markets that saw massive price gains during the pandemic. These Western markets that were super hot during the pandemic. Well, these Western markets that saw the biggest price gains during the pandemic are also the markets where homeowners have the most home equity. And so even if these markets were to see a 10%, 15%, 20% price decline, which, by the way, I'm not saying this is going to happen. I don't think so. I don't think it's going to happen. But even if they were to see large price declines, these homeowners are still coming out on top. They're coming out because these markets are markets that saw 40, 50, 60% price increases during the pandemic, and where home equity is at a record high. And so the sky is not falling. Homeowners are in a pretty good situation. Most homeowners are better off today than they were before the pandemic. And so I don't see it. And let me address one last point. If you worry about people who bought at the peak for people who bought at the peak, say in spring 2022 or in May 2022, I think one of the things that people don't realize is that the typical homeowner spends about 13 years in their home. And so people who bought at the peak in May or June of this year are just not selling. They're not in the market right now. I think the people who are feeling the pressure a little bit are builders. But other than that, I think we're still on pretty solid ground. The market has slowed because buyers have pulled back, not because of what we saw before the global financial crisis, which was basically a mad rush to get rid of inventory. Homeowners selling because they couldn't afford their monthly payments anymore. That's just not the case.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, I don't disagree with anything that you said. I've watched Nick Gurley on YouTube for probably 3 years. I've found a lot that he's brought forward to be, at the very least, interesting. And
it's entertaining. Right. I got to say, it's entertaining. It's interesting. It's entertaining. The good news is that he's using facts, and that's good. The hard part with data is that you have to understand how to analyze that data. You have to understand kind of the theory behind what, try to understand what explains these empirical observations before you can come out with something conclusive.
I appreciate that. I think that a lot of people that are around me that have opinions about, where the housing market is, we're all homeowners or potential real estate investors or past real estate investors. One of the concerns I think that is out there is for those people who have purchased a home in the last year. You said 13 years is the typical home ownership. I'd have to take a look and just to keep you honest, I'd have to take a look and verify that number. But if you are in a sudden change situation and you did buy a home in the last year and you're having to let go, or the last 2 years, and you're having to let go of that home now because of some circumstantial change in your life, any of the things that we've talked about, prior that drive moves, jobs, retirement, family, things like that. If you did buy in the last year, you're probably going to be in a whipsaw.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you have a sudden shock, a sudden life change occurring right now, how much of this is really going on to be a threat to the financial system? Not much. We know mortgage delinquencies are still very low, lower than they were before the pandemic. And so there's not enough of it to justify.
There shouldn't be any panic on the street, is what you're saying.
Exactly. There should not be any panic. There shouldn't be any panic on the streets. The idea, for example, I saw one of Nick Gurley's tweet. Home buyers are not coming back into the market in these crash cities. And then he adds, home sales are down 50% in Las Vegas, 46% in Phoenix. Declining prices are actually driving people away from the housing market. It's one thing to put out the stats, and that's fine. It's another thing to add declining prices are driving people out of. That's just not true. I mean, people are waiting. What pushed people out of the market in the first place was the combination of higher prices and higher mortgage rates. An improvement in prices and affordability and mortgage rates, which, by the way, we're already seeing mortgage rates tick down somewhat because inflation's finally coming down, will actually help buyers, help support housing market activity and home buying activity. You have the facts, and it's great to have the facts, and it's important to base everything on the data, but it's also important to understand that the reason home sales are down right now is because we saw an affordability crunch, and if that affordability crunch is resolved, it's likely home sales will pick up again. Understanding what's causing the decline in home sales and prices is very important. And we know that in this environment is that buyers have pulled back because of the affordability crunch. And that if the affordability crunch gets resolved, buyers are likely to come back into the market.
For Orphe Divounguy, this has been Chris Krug. Subscribe to Everyday Economics and dozens of other quality podcasts at americastalking.com.
Freedom and liberty are important to all of us. If you're looking for civil, intellectual conversations with those shaping the future of freedom, try the Future of Freedom podcast with me, Scott Bertram. We speak with leaders across the country in the greater conservative and libertarian movements. In-depth conversations about where the next intellectual battles will happen across the country. It's the Future of Freedom podcast. Find it at americastalking.com or wherever you get your podcasts.